Hi, I'm Mark, a 42-year-old father of one. My life has been a series of decisions. Some I thought were right at the time, others I wish I could undo. This story isn't about justifying my mistakes or asking for sympathy. It's about a journey, a painful one, that taught me the weight of neglect and the cost of taking relationships for granted. 12 years ago, my life looked completely different. I was married to Sarah, my high school sweetheart, and we had a son, Jake, who was 9 at the time. We lived in what looked like a perfect suburban life, a decent house, steady jobs, and a close-knit community. But beneath the surface, our marriage was crumbling. We'd grown apart, as many couples do, and started to drift into the lives of other people. When Sarah sat me down one evening and admitted she'd met someone else, I wasn't even surprised. The truth was, I had too. For years, we had been roommates rather than partners, holding it together for Jake but slowly losing any meaningful connection. That night, we made what felt like the most rational decision: to separate amicably and pursue lives with the people who made us happy. For Jake's sake, we promised to remain civil and agreed on joint custody. I was staying in the house, and Sarah would move in with her boyfriend, about 2 miles away. Jake would spend alternate weeks with each of us, shuttling between our two homes. We presented it to him as calmly as we could, promising that he would still have both parents in his life. But the look on his face, it's something I still can't forget. He was crushed. His little world, the only one he'd ever known, was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do about it. He didn't cry immediately, but his eyes welled up, and when he finally broke down, it wasn't loud or angry. It was a quiet, heartbreaking sob that made me question everything. I told myself he would adjust, that kids are resilient, and that this was better for everyone in the long run. Things moved quickly after that. Sarah packed up and left within weeks. Her boyfriend, Paul, had a daughter of his own, but she mostly lived with her mother. Sarah seemed excited about the prospect of starting over, and I was determined to do the same. I was already seeing someone new, Claire, a single mom with twin boys, Ethan and Caleb, who were the same age as Jake. I thought blending our families would be a smooth transition, but I underestimated how deeply Jake resented the changes. The first few months of co-parenting were rocky. Jake spent alternating weeks at Sarah's and mine, but I could see how uncomfortable he was. At Sarah's, he had to navigate a new dynamic with Paul and the prospect of a new sibling, as Sarah became pregnant within 6 months of moving out. At my house, he felt like an outsider. Claire's boys didn't make it easy on him. They were territorial and dismissive, treating Jake as if he didn't belong. Claire tried to mediate, but her patience only went so far. When arguments erupted between the kids, she often sided with her boys, leaving Jake feeling even more isolated. I tried to bridge the gap, but balancing a new relationship and fatherhood proved harder than I'd imagined. Jake began spending more and more time with my sister Laura. She was his godmother and had always been a steady presence in his life. Laura was single and lived alone, so her home became a refuge for him. I told myself it was just a phase, that Jake needed space to adjust. But deep down, I knew I was failing him. The breaking point came about a year into our new arrangement. I hadn't seen Jake for a couple of weeks, assuming he was with Sarah. She hadn't mentioned anything, and I was too busy juggling work, Claire, and her boys to check in. One day, Laura called me out of the blue. "Mark, do you even know where your son is?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Of course," I replied defensively. "He's with Sarah this week." "No, he's not. He's been with me for 3 months." Her words hit me like a freight train. 3 months? How had I not noticed? How had I let it get to this point? I mumbled an excuse, something about being busy and assuming Sarah had things under control. But Laura wasn't buying it. "Jake didn't want me to call," she said, her tone softer now. "He didn't want you to feel guilty. But Mark, he's hurting. He feels like neither of you want him." That night, I sat alone in the living room, grappling with what Laura had said. It wasn't just her words. It was the truth behind them. Jake was my son, and I had let him slip through the cracks. I told myself I loved him, but love isn't just a feeling. It's action, commitment, showing up even when it's inconvenient. When I finally mustered the courage to talk to Jake, his response was measured but cutting. "It's okay, Dad," he said. "I'm better off with Aunt Laura. At least she makes time for me." I wanted to argue, to tell him how much I cared, but the words felt hollow. He was right. I had failed him, and there was no denying it. Over the next few years, our relationship grew more distant. Jake stopped coming over entirely, spending all his time with Laura. She stepped up in ways I should have, becoming the stable parent he needed while I became little more than a name on paper. I sent money when I remembered, but even that tapered off over time. Looking back, I don't know if I was avoiding Jake because I felt guilty or because I convinced myself he didn't need me anymore. Maybe it was both. Either way, I let the distance grow, thinking I could make up for it someday. I just didn't realize how far we'd drifted or how hard it would be to find my way back. After the divorce, I genuinely believed that our co-parenting arrangement would help my son adjust to the changes in our lives. At 12 years old, Liam was a bright and curious kid, and I thought the alternating weeks between his mother's house and mine would give him a sense of stability. I was wrong. When I brought Rachel, my girlfriend, into my home, she came with her 2 kids, Mia and Jonah. They were younger than Liam, and naturally they needed more attention and care. I tried to make the transition as smooth as possible for everyone, but I underestimated how difficult it would be for Liam to accept this new dynamic. Suddenly, the home he once knew had strangers in it, people he didn't choose and wasn't ready to welcome. I could see he was struggling, but I told myself he just needed time to adapt. I didn't want to admit how much things were changing between us. Liam started spending more time at his Aunt Michelle's house. At first, it seemed harmless. He had always been close to her, and I thought having a trusted family member nearby was a good outlet for him. I figured it was a phase. He's just a teenager, I told myself. He'll come around. But as weeks turned into months, the time Liam spent at Michelle's increased. He seemed to prefer her house over mine, and I convinced myself it was because he liked the quieter environment. After all, my new household was loud and chaotic with 2 young kids running around. I told myself that he was fine, and that I was still doing what was best for him by giving him space. What I didn't want to confront was how little effort I was putting into our relationship. Between work, managing the demands of a blended family, and trying to build a future with Rachel, I had unintentionally sidelined Liam. I thought I was being a responsible father by providing for him financially and giving him the room to adjust. But in reality, I was just avoiding the hard work of connecting with him. Every missed dinner, every canceled weekend plan, and every ignored text chipped away at the bond we once had. The wake-up call should have been when Liam stopped asking to spend time with me. Instead, I rationalized it as him becoming more independent, even though deep down, I knew better. He wasn't reaching out because he had learned that I wouldn't be there for him. The realization gnawed at me, but instead of taking action, I let the gap between us widen. I told myself he was fine, happy even, because that was easier than admitting the truth. I was failing him. When he stopped calling me Dad and started referring to me by my first name, it stung, but I chalked it up to teenage rebellion. I didn't want to face the possibility that it was something deeper. When he stayed with Michelle for weeks at a time, I didn't push him to come back. And when he finally stopped coming over altogether, I convinced myself that he just needed more time. In hindsight, it's obvious that I was in denial. I thought I was doing the right thing by stepping back, giving Liam what I assumed he needed, but all I was doing was avoiding the uncomfortable truth. I had let my priorities shift away from him. I was pouring my time and energy into my new life, while Liam was quietly fading from it. By the time I realized how far we'd drifted, it was already too late. The boy who used to run to me with his problems now had no reason to turn to me at all. And the worst part was, I had no one to blame but myself. Life went on, but not in the way I'd imagined. My relationship with Jake had all but vanished, reduced to the occasional awkward phone call or a card sent during the holidays. Meanwhile, Sarah had remarried, fully immersed in her new family, and I continued to live with Claire and her twins, though I wouldn't say it was a happy home. Claire and I tried to make things work, but our relationship felt like a constant negotiation about the kids, the bills, everything. Jake's absence hung over me like a shadow, a constant reminder of the father I wasn't, and yet I did nothing. I told myself that reaching out to him now would only make things worse. My sister Laura, on the other hand, remained steadfast in Jake's life. She was his rock, and I grew to resent how easily she had stepped into the role I had abandoned. Every time she posted pictures of her and Jake, fishing, hiking, even celebrating his birthdays, I felt a pang of jealousy and shame. Years passed, and Jake turned 18 without so much as a call from me, so by then, I'd convinced myself it was for the best. He was better off with Laura, and I didn't want to upset the delicate balance he'd found, but deep down, I knew I was just avoiding the hard truth. I'd failed him, and I didn't know how to fix it. Then, 3 months ago, my father, Jake's grandfather, passed away. Dad and I had never been particularly close, but losing him was harder than I expected. It wasn't the kind of grief that comes from losing someone you love deeply. It was the regret of all the things left unsaid, the years wasted on petty differences and neglect. Laura and I were the only ones who spent any real time with Dad in his final years. My brothers rarely visited, too busy with their lives to care for the man who had raised us. Laura, as always, shouldered the responsibility, moving in with Dad to care for him until the very end. When the will was read, no one was prepared for what came next. Dad left everything to Laura: the 150-acre farmland, the family farmhouse, and a $1 million inheritance. The rest of the money went to charity, leaving nothing for my brothers or me. The room erupted into chaos. My brothers shouted about fairness, calling Dad's decision an insult to the family. They couldn't understand why he'd left everything to Laura, but I understood. She earned it. She was the only one who had shown up for him, just as she had shown up for Jake when I hadn't. I stayed quiet during the argument, too ashamed to speak. Laura didn't owe anyone an explanation, but she gave one anyway. She told them how she had cared for Dad when no one else would, how she had begged them to visit, and how they'd ignored her calls. Her voice was calm, but her words were sharp enough to cut through the noise. Then she turned to me. "Mark, I need to talk to you," she said, her tone softer now. We left the room, and Laura led me outside to the porch. The air was heavy with the scent of rain, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "Jake's been asking about you," she said finally. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "He wants to know why you don't reach out," Laura said. "Why you don't care." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "I care," I said, though it sounded weak even to my ears. I didn't think he wanted to hear from me." Laura sighed. "Mark, you've convinced yourself that you're doing him a favor by staying away, but all you're doing is hurting him. He still needs you, even if he won't admit it." I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I didn't know if I could face Jake after everything I'd done, or failed to do. Before I could respond, Laura changed the subject. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her bag. She handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "It's for you," she said. "From Dad." I opened the envelope, my hands trembling. Inside was a handwritten letter, along with a check for $1 million. The inheritance Dad had left to Laura. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at her. "It's yours," Laura said simply. "Dad wanted me to decide what to do with it, and I'm giving it to you." I shook my head. "I can't take this. You earned it. Mark," she interrupted, her voice firm. "This isn't about me. It's about Jake. He told me how much you used to talk about starting your own business, about creating something for him to be proud of. Use this money to build the life you've always wanted, for yourself and for him." I stared at the check, overwhelmed. I wanted to refuse, to tell her I didn't deserve it, but I knew Laura wouldn't take no for an answer. That night, I sat in my car, staring at the check and thinking about everything Laura had said. She was right. I'd spent years running from my mistakes, convincing myself that it was too late to fix them. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe this was my chance to finally do something right. As I drove home, I made a decision. It was time to stop running. It was time to be the father Jake deserved, even if it meant facing the pain I'd been avoiding for so long. When the news about my father's will came to light, it hit me harder than I expected. He had left everything to my sister, Michelle. $1 million, the house, everything. The decision blindsided me, but what stung the most was finding out that Michelle had quietly funneled most of the inheritance to Liam, helping him start a business. My son, who I hadn't seen in months, now had a life of his own, supported by the family I had taken for granted. The realization was brutal. My father had seen something I hadn't. I wasn't the father Liam needed. Instead of leaving me a legacy to pass down, he entrusted Michelle with that responsibility, knowing she would do right by Liam. For the first time, I truly understood how much I had failed my son. That money wasn't just about financial security, it was a testament to the relationships I had neglected. I couldn't sit with the guilt any longer. I had to do something, anything to reconnect with Liam. I started small, reaching out through text messages, but they went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. I told myself he was busy, but I knew the truth. He didn't want to talk to me. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I decided to try something more personal, showing up in person. The opportunity came when I learned Liam was graduating from high school. It was a big moment, and I couldn't let it pass without at least trying to be there for him. I found out the date and time from Michelle and decided to surprise him. I showed up early, standing nervously at the back of the school auditorium. I hadn't seen Liam in over a year, and the sight of him hit me like a punch to the gut. He looked taller, more confident, and completely different from the boy I remembered. When the ceremony ended, I caught him outside, standing with Michelle and a group of friends. I approached cautiously, feeling more like a stranger than a father. "Liam?" I said, my voice shaky. He turned, and for a moment, there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then it vanished, replaced by a cold, distant stare. "What are you doing here?" he asked flatly. "I wanted to be here for you," I said, "to celebrate this moment with you." He crossed his arms, his posture rigid. "You don't get to show up now and pretend to care. Where were you when it actually mattered?" His words hit me like a blow. I stammered, trying to find the right thing to say. "Liam, I know I haven't been there the way I should have. I've made mistakes, huge ones, but I want to make things right. I want to be your dad again." He let out a bitter laugh. "Now, you want to fix things now? Is it because of Grandpa's? Because if that's what this is about, you can forget it." "No, it's not about the money," I said quickly. "I don't care about that. I care about you. I miss you." But Liam wasn't buying it. He shook his head, his face hard with resentment. "You only miss me because you lost everything else. You're not here because you care. You're here because you feel guilty. And you should." I stood there, speechless, as he turned and walked away. I wanted to chase after him to explain myself, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. I had let him down too many times, and now he had walls I couldn't break through. Over the next few weeks, I kept trying. I called, I texted, I even wrote a letter, pouring out my regrets and begging for a chance to rebuild our relationship. Eventually, Liam picked up the phone, but it wasn't to reconcile. "You can stop pretending now," he said. "I don't need you to play the hero. I've moved on." His words stayed with me long after the call ended. I had waited too long to act, and now Liam had a life where I wasn't welcome. It was the hardest truth I'd ever had to face, but no matter how painful it was, I wasn't ready to give up. For the first time in years, I was willing to do the work, to prove to Liam that I could be the father he deserved, even if it took the rest of my life. Life after that conversation with Jake didn't get easier overnight, but it marked the beginning of a slow, steady thaw. For the first time in years, I felt like we were no longer just two people who happened to share DNA. We were beginning to rebuild something fragile but real. Still, I knew there were no shortcuts to fixing the years of distance and resentment between us. It would take time and consistency. I kept my word to Jake, reaching out regularly and showing up for him in ways I should have from the start. We'd grab lunch or coffee when he was free, or sometimes just go for a drive. I learned quickly that Jake wasn't big on heavy conversations. Instead, he preferred to talk about lighter things. His classes, his friends, or whatever Netflix series he was binging. I followed his lead, knowing that pushing too hard would only make him pull away. Meanwhile, I threw myself into building the business I had dreamed of for so long. Laura's generosity had given me the financial freedom to take the leap, but the hard work was mine to do. I started small, focusing on creating a boutique landscape design company. The skills I'd honed helping Claire with her nursery, coupled with my own creative vision, turned out to be the perfect foundation. Within months, I had a few small contracts and a growing sense of pride. Jake noticed the change in me, though he never said it outright. He'd ask about the business, his curiosity slipping through in small but telling ways. It felt good to have something to share with him, something that showed I wasn't the same man who had once let him down. Still, there were setbacks, moments that reminded me how deep his hurt ran. One afternoon, Jake invited me to a casual BBQ with some of his friends. It was the first time I'd been included in his social circle, and I was eager to make a good impression. But when I arrived, I quickly realized he hadn't told anyone who I was. He introduced me as Mark, with no mention of being his dad. At first, I didn't mind. Jake had every right to define our relationship on his own terms. But as the evening wore on, hearing his friends talk about their own dads, joking about their quirks or sharing proud moments, I felt the sting of my absence in his life. When I finally left, I told myself not to take it personally, but it was hard not to wonder if Jake would ever truly see me as his father again. Later that week, I mentioned it to Laura during one of our regular phone calls. She listened patiently, then said something that stuck with me. "Mark, you're not just earning back Jake's trust. You're teaching him how to trust again. Give him time." Laura's words gave me perspective, but they also made me realize how much work I still had to do. Not just with Jake, but with myself. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd resisted for years. It was humbling to confront my failures head-on, but it also gave me the tools to approach my relationship with Jake more thoughtfully. Around this time, my parents, Jake's grandparents, decided they wanted back in his life. My mom called me out of the blue, asking for Jake's number. She said she wanted to apologize, to make things right. I didn't doubt her sincerity, but I couldn't ignore the timing. News of my growing business had apparently reached them, and I couldn't shake the feeling that their sudden interest had more to do with appearances than genuine remorse. I told Mom I'd think about it and hung up. Jake's relationship with his grandparents was his to decide, not mine, but I couldn't help feeling protective. I didn't want them swooping in now, stirring up old wounds for the sake of their own conscience. When I brought it up with Jake, he surprised me. "If they want to talk, let them," he said simply, "but I'm not making it easy for them." True to his word, Jake met with them once but kept his distance afterward. He told me later that their apologies felt hollow, like they were going through the motions. "They're not like you, Dad," he said. "You actually mean it." Hearing him call me Dad again, without hesitation or bitterness, was a moment I'll never forget. It wasn't just a word. It was proof that I was finally earning my place in his life. That year, I also saw another shift in our relationship. Jake started inviting me to more milestones. His college graduation, a promotion at his first job, even a housewarming party when he moved into his own place. Each invite felt like a small victory, a reminder that I was no longer just an outsider looking in. But perhaps the biggest turning point came when Jake asked me for advice on something deeply personal. He was struggling with a career decision, torn between taking a safer path or following a riskier dream. As we talked it through, I realized he wasn't just looking for answers. He wanted my perspective. He trusted me enough to value my opinion, and that meant everything. In the years since, Jake and I have continued to rebuild our relationship one step at a time. There are still moments of tension, times when the past feels too close for comfort, but those moments are outweighed by the bond we've managed to create, a bond forged not by blood, but by choice. Looking back, I know I can never undo the mistakes I made as a father, but I've learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about showing up in the present and proving every day that you've changed. And for Jake, I'll keep showing up because he's worth it. I used to think that apologies could fix everything, that if I just said the right words, it would be enough to patch up the damage. But by the time I tried to rebuild the bridge with Liam, I realized how naive that belief was. Words are cheap, and I had spent years proving to him that my actions didn't match them. By the time I finally showed up, all I had left were empty promises and a history of neglect. Things came to a head after I made one of the worst decisions of my life. Struggling financially, I found myself drowning in debt. My business ventures had failed, my bills piled up, and creditors were circling. In a moment of desperation, I convinced myself that Liam, now a successful entrepreneur thanks to Michelle's support, could help. He had the resources, and I thought maybe this could be a way to show him I trusted him. But instead of reaching out to him directly, I did something that crossed every boundary. I gave his contact information to one of the banks hounding me for repayment. I told myself it wasn't a big deal, but deep down, I knew it was a betrayal. Liam called me the next day. His voice was sharp, colder than I'd ever heard it. "Did you give my number to your creditors?" he demanded. I didn't know what else to do," I stammered, trying to explain. "I thought maybe you could help." "Help?" he shot back. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just drag me into your mess, you showed me exactly why I can't trust you. You haven't changed at all. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I wasn't thinking. I was desperate. Desperate, he repeated, his tone cutting. Desperate is what you felt when you needed money, not when you saw our relationship falling apart. You didn't care enough to fight for me back then, and now you only care because I have something you want. This isn't about me. It's about you. It's always been about you. His words sliced through me, leaving no room for rebuttal. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. The quiet disdain in his voice was more devastating than any outburst could have been. I can't do this anymore, he said after a long pause. You've burned every bridge, and I'm done rebuilding them for you. Stop calling, stop texting, and stop pretending you're going to change. I don't want anything to do with you. The line went dead, and for a moment, I just sat there, holding the phone to my ear as if the call hadn't ended. My hands shook, and my chest tightened. I had hoped for anger, even shouting. Anything that would have shown me there was still a spark of emotion left between us, but his calm, deliberate rejection made it clear. I wasn't a part of his life anymore. I was just a distant memory, someone he had learned to live without. The silence that followed was unbearable. For days, I replayed the conversation in my head, dissecting every word he had said. I wanted to believe he was wrong, that I wasn't as selfish or neglectful as he claimed. But the truth was undeniable. Liam was right. I had spent years prioritizing myself, my comfort, my new family, my ambitions, over him. And now, I was reaping the consequences. I finally stopped trying to contact him, not because I didn't care, but because I realized how much harm I had already done. I had to respect his boundaries, even if it meant accepting the possibility that our relationship might never recover. The idea was unbearable, but I couldn't force my way back into his life. In the months that followed, I began to confront the full scope of my failures. I started going to therapy, not to fix myself for Liam, but because I needed to understand how I had let things spiral so far out of control. I had to face the patterns that had defined my life, avoiding hard conversations, chasing short-term gratification, and running away from responsibility. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally being honest with myself. Every day, I think about Liam. I wonder if he's happy, if his business is thriving, if he's found the peace I couldn't give him. I imagine what his life looks like now, and I hope he's surrounded by people who care for him in ways I never did. I don't expect forgiveness, and I've accepted that he might never want me in his life again. That's the price I have to pay for the years I spent putting him second, or third, or last. But even though I've lost him, I've made a vow to myself. I won't let my past define me. I can't undo the pain I caused Liam, but I can live the rest of my life in a way that honors the father I should have been. That means showing up for the people who need me now, even when it's hard. It means owning my mistakes, even when it hurts. And it means letting go of the hope that an apology alone can erase the damage I've done. Sometimes, late at night, I think about what I would say to Liam if he ever gave me another chance. I wouldn't make excuses, and I wouldn't beg for forgiveness. I would simply tell him the truth, that he taught me more about love, responsibility, and accountability than I ever taught him, and that no matter what happens, I will always be proud of the man he's become. For now, all I can do is wait, and hope that in time, Liam might find it in his heart to let me back in. And if that day never comes, I'll keep living with the lessons he taught me, even if they came at the cost of losing him. Story 2. Mel told my disabled dad it would be embarrassing if he walked me down the aisle. She showed up at my house trying to hurt me when we stopped communication. Last week I wed Chad, my spouse. We should be savoring our honeymoon right now, but unfortunately it has been quite challenging and demanding, mostly because of the trouble Chad's mother, Elizabeth, generated during our wedding. For background, Elizabeth has caused a lot of stress in our life since the day Chad first brought me to her. She has never especially liked me. According to Chad, she always had a rather different view on who her son should wed. Though Chad had no interest in her, his mother's heart was set on one of her family friend's daughters. His mother was therefore enraged with him when he started seeing me. She once even told me I was only a passing fling for Chad to toy with until he grew bored. Naturally enraged, I returned by claiming Chad wasn't some prize to be won. and that I was having a lot of fun toying about with him too. Though she strongly objects, Chad has always stood behind me. He always made it very plain to her and to everyone else in his family that he intended to spend his lifetime with me. Elizabeth would then become enraged with him and even threaten to cut off all communication. Still, Chad's dedication to our partnership has never wavered. Things were really tough when Chad asked to get married, and I said yes. She had to learn about our involvement from some of her mutual friends, as he got bored of her discouraging him. She reacted really strongly as a result. She called Chad completely enraged, screaming at him about how he had disgraced her by not notifying her about our engagement before informing everyone else. She was furious that he had decided to live with me, someone she believed unworthy of her kid. Always cool under pressure, Chad said he had purposefully not told her the news to prevent any criticism. He wanted not to let her criticism ruin what should have been a happy occasion for us. Elizabeth responded by threatening severely. Should Chad actually wed me, she would starve herself to death and refuse to eat anything. Chad brushed it off, thinking her warnings ridiculous. He advised her to do whatever she wanted and even made a snarky remark saying she could look better if she dropped a few pounds. This simply stoked her wrath, which grew increasingly intense. Then, should Chad proceed with the marriage, she threatened to cut him off entirely. Her ultimatum had no effect on him. Elizabeth sought to reach out to me personally, trying to convince me that by marrying her son without her approval, I was gravely mistaken. She failed in her attempts to control her son. Her texts were full of hate. She even said she wished my soul would burn in hell for what I had done to her. This was a really nasty and strong reaction, and I was sick and tired of her always attempting to sour our joyful moment. Elizabeth was thus not sent an invitation when it came time to invite folks to our wedding. Invited, Chad's father called us wondering why his wife had not gotten any invitations and how supposedly she had been crying for hours in her chamber at this insult. Chad's father insisted that Chad and I visit his house to have a sit-down with Elizabeth in order to maybe go past the entire drama and help to settle our problems. He made it plain that if his mother left out of our wedding, his family would be quite offended. Chad reluctantly consented, hoping a face-to-face meeting could help to ease things. We visited Elizabeth the following day, but the meeting was hardly helpful. We met with his mother, Elizabeth, the next day. She clearly showed no desire in having a meaningful conversation from the time we arrived. She behaved instead as though she were the victim under the circumstances. Elizabeth fixated fiercely on me during the talk. Her eyes betrayed scorn, and it was obvious she blamed me for all that had gone wrong. Trying his best to mediate, Chad's father urged Elizabeth to apologize to us for all she had done to create this unwarranted friction and stress. Still, this advice simply infuriated her more. She lost it and screamed at Chad's father, as well as accused them of being so stupid for not appreciating the type of lady I was. She argued that she only wanted what was best for her son. Hence, I was obviously not good enough for him. I could feel my annoyance mounting. So, in an attempt to find some clarification, I questioned her straightforwardly why she had never approved of me from the start and what kind of woman she thought would be appropriate for Chad. She said she objected to my being a working woman and that I made as much as Chad. She then asserted that if things went south, women like me, who are financially independent, would have no trouble cheating on or divorcing their husbands. I just did not fit the family the best. She said Chad required a more domestic woman capable of fulfilling the conventional wife role. Elizabeth also mentioned how women in her society were expected to perform all around the house and how just males were expected to work. She said that since I made Chad do half of the housework, which she thought unacceptable, I was selfish. She obviously had problems with the larger concept of gender roles in our relationship as much as with me. Thank you. Chad defended me. He loved that we both did and just to be a good partner by sharing housework. He remembered his mother, how years earlier, when his dad lost his work, they were practically destitute and had to seek their grandparents for financial assistance. He noted that in our situation, should one of us lose our jobs, we both knew the other could cover things without having to borrow money from anyone. That Chad really valued and understood me for who I am made me very happy. The father of Chad agreed with him and advised Elizabeth to learn to accept me for who I am and go past her cultural views. They might so lose out on their son permanently otherwise. After much conflict and discussion, Elizabeth finally agreed to stand aside and keep her opinions to herself about our relationship, grudgingly. I wasn't especially worried by her not totally embracing me. What was important to me was that she would leave our company and not remark going forward, what I had always wanted. We proceeded to invite her to the wedding, knowing that arrangement was in place. Elizabeth did try to complicate matters a little bit throughout wedding planning, but everything was still under control. But one of the main problems started when she insisted on wearing a very light blue dress to the ceremony, a hue so pale it could nearly be confused with white. This seems like a passive-aggressive action, given the significance of the bride being the only one in white. I let my husband handle this, and he quite forcefully made it plain to her that we would not hesitate to ask her to leave if she showed up in that attire. She finally pulled back from the light blue dress concept. On the wedding day, she arrived in a black outfit, as though she were attending a funeral rather than her son's wedding. It was a direct declaration, as if she wanted to let everyone know she objected to the union. I choose to ignore it, even though I could have let it irritate me. I chose to let it go as I wanted her attention-seeking behaviors to take center stage over what should have been the best day of my life, emphasizing the happiness of marriage to Chad instead of letting Elizabeth's actions take center stage. Elizabeth walked up out of the blue as I was getting ready to walk down the aisle and waited for my dad to join me so we could stroll down the aisle together. Already experiencing a flurry of emotions, I wasn't sure what to anticipate when she asked to talk to me. She started by informing me she had been chatting with some of her relatives and had discovered my dad would be the one walking me down the aisle. I nodded, and then she said without thinking twice that she felt that was inappropriate for him to do. Startled and perplexed, I asked her why she thought that. She said that people would talk for context. My dad has been paralyzed from the waist down for the past 3 years, so it would not be a good look for the family. My mom died in a terrible car accident he and she were involved in years ago, and the accident left my dad unable to walk, even as he miraculously lived. For our family, that was an immensely trying period. Still, I would always be appreciative that my dad had lived. He made great effort over the years to recover as much freedom as he could. My dad first became quite emotional when Chad and I requested he accompany me down the aisle. Well, I could see the significance it held for him. He did express worries about people making remarks or gossiping about his illness, but I told him none of that bothered me. I wanted him right at my side. He was my dad. Elizabeth's nasty remark therefore really touched a nerve. Her saying something so heartless shocked me, especially on such a significant day. She obviously paid only attention to appearances, totally ignoring the emotional meaning of the event. For her to minimize my dad's presence to a negative look for the family felt harsh and heartless. He had gone through so much. This is why Chad and I had purposefully kept the arrangement for my dad to escort me down the altar from Elizabeth, knowing her harshness and critical nature. Now that she knew, though, she insisted that I alter the schedule. She insisted that Chad should walk me down the aisle as his father had helped to pay for the wedding. She said my dad should simply watch from the sidelines and let a true man like her spouse to carry on that honor. Her comments pounced like a smack in the face. My wrath boiled, calling her husband a true guy in comparison to my dad, who had survived so much and fought so hard just to be able to accompany me on this day. The obvious disdain for my dad after everything he had gone through made my blood boil. I swear, if it hadn't been my wedding day, I would have grabbed her by the hair and hauled her straight then and there out of the venue. I was seeing red, but my dad came up before I could even get a word in to shut her down. He asked me what was wrong right away. Hence, he must have seen the irritation and fury on my face. I have to inhale deeply, reminding myself that today was meant to be about love, happiness, and celebration, not about fighting with my mother-in-law. I counted to 10. Elizabeth's criticism seemed like the last thing I wanted to have cloud this important day. I said to Elizabeth to kindly take her seat as I would be heading down the aisle with my dad as scheduled, and smiled gently while swallowing the words I wanted to throw at her. She looked at me negatively, shook her head as if she were let down in me, but I didn't give a damn. I was left standing there with my dad when she turned and headed for her seat. Elizabeth's opinions or words notwithstanding, my dad was the one escorting me down the aisle. That was all that counted. Taking my father's hand, I knew I had made the right decision. As I made my way down the aisle, the rest of the wedding ceremony played out wonderfully. Chad did observe that my expressions were strange. Though I tried my best to disguise the hurt and concentrate on the happiness of the occasion, it was obvious that the earlier talk with his mother had influenced me. When we at last got a peaceful time together following the ceremony, Chad asked me what had happened. Claiming my father's health would be a poor look for the family, I admitted all Elizabeth had said, how she had tried to persuade me to let her father lead me down the aisle instead of my own dad. I didn't want to keep it from him. Chad grew enraged. Immediately, his protective instincts kicked in, and he told me he was going to ask his dad to escort his mother out of the wedding right away. She had gone too far, he thought, and had no right to be there following such a nasty comment. I wanted not to create a scene even though I valued his support and could understand his wrath. Making noise would simply provide Elizabeth the attention she seemed to be yearning for. I wanted nothing more than her taking center stage on what was meant to be our day. I pushed Chad to let it go just for the evening. I told him we could sort things out later in private. Once the wedding came to an end, Chad reluctantly consented, but he kept apologizing to me for what his mother had said. Her actions truly infuriated him, and he swore we would handle it later in the evening. Surrounded by friends and relatives who really loved us, Chad and I tried to appreciate every second of the celebration. Both my father and my father-in-law delivered rather moving and passionate remarks throughout the speech times. Hearing their voices filled with love and pride warmed me, offering good comments and well wishes. A few of my relatives and several of Chad's family members also grabbed the microphone to voice their delight about our marriage. I couldn't help but notice Elizabeth sitting in silence, binge drinking all through. She appeared to be seething, her posture rigid as though she were hardly controlling her irritation. Trying to ignore it, I hoped the remainder of the evening would pass without incident. Then one of our cousins, probably unaware of the conflict, handed Elizabeth the microphone and asked her to say a few words for her son and his new spouse. I turned to glance at Chad the instant the mic dropped into her hands. Concerned about what she would say, he seemed exactly as tense as I did. His mother would just wish us the best and provide a nice congratulatory, then sit down without starting a scene. Deep down, though, I worried Elizabeth might be unable to stop jabbing. Sadly, I was right as well. Perhaps from the few cocktails she had, Elizabeth rose up, gently wobbling, and began declaring how she just couldn't believe her baby boy had married. As a mother, she claimed, nothing could make her happier than seeing her child grow into a man. She then stopped, inhaled deeply, and went on to remark that, had the bride let her father guide her down the aisle, her son's wedding would have been almost perfect. Rather more perfect, I exclaimed, terribly disgusted. Elizabeth said how embarrassing it was to watch a wheelchair user accompanying the bride and how she felt guilty because my dad could not even properly hug me or stand next to me. Her address left everyone shocked. Her remarks went beyond callousness. They were disrespectful and degrading. Having gone through so much, my dad had every right to walk me down the aisle and have her publicly humiliate him like that, essentially reducing him to his disability in front of all our guests. Right then and there, I could hardly restrain myself from snapping at her. She remained there clutching the microphone, utterly unconcerned about the devastation her words had done. Elizabeth's outburst persisted, and my husband waved to the staff to take off the microphone, but that had no effect. She persisted, now accusing my dad of being selfish for not moving aside in the first place, contending that, as the father of the bride, he should have known how embarrassing the groom's family would find him in a wheelchair. Glancing over at my father, who saw there silently, his face flushed with shame as he absorbed every nasty remark she flung before she could insult us further, I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. Totally enraged, Chad rushed over to his mother and quickly grabbed the microphone from her hand. Turning to his father, he insisted on his escorting her out of the arena. His dad was neither hesitant nor argumentative. Immediately he got up, obviously embarrassed at Elizabeth's behavior. Elizabeth resisted. The entire room fell into startled quiet when he grabbed her arm and tried to draw her away from the scene, visitors staring in shock and incredulity. While some of them turned away their eyes, others were embarrassed, not knowing what to do. As I watched the expression of shame and suffering on my father's face, my heart cracked. He had only loved and supported me, and now on my wedding day he had been humiliated in front of everyone. Made sick to my stomach, saddened that this was happening while Elizabeth was being taken away. She kept yelling drunkenly that she was simply stating the truth and that other visitors felt the same way. At that point, enraged and disgusted, Chad yelled at her that he felt ashamed of having a parent like her and for her to get the hell away from us. He told her he never wanted to see her face ever once more. Elizabeth kept cursing at me until Chad's father finally physically dragged her out of the arena. Like something out of a dream. It was bizarre, shaken. All I could think about was my father, my heart aching. I hurried over to him to see his degree of damage. He reassured me he was fine, but after hearing her words, I could see he felt ashamed and nervous. Elizabeth had effectively turned what ought to have been one of the happiest events of my life into a memory marred by her harshness. Chad and his dad have continually apologized to my dad for everything ever since then. They detest everything. Elizabeth has also been attempting to get in touch with us, but we haven't responded to her calls either for advice to my husband on permanently cutting his mother off from our life. I want our marriage to start on the right note, and I'm not sure where my husband's head is. Still, I want us to stick to our words and never see her again. Elizabeth's speech embarrassed our wedding guests just like it did us. Not one of them approved of her behavior. Many visitors came to me to show their sympathies and annoyance after Elizabeth was hauled out, calling her acts absurd and unacceptable. They reassured me they disagreed with her behavior and supported Chad's choice to speak out for me. Although some of Chad's cousins admitted Elizabeth had always been unhinged about her only son, they also expressed pleasure in how Chad had handled the whole matter. Regarding my spouse, I had a frank discussion about his mother at last, something I had been avoiding since we were still on our honeymoon. I told him how the embarrassment and the manner in which Elizabeth's statements had impacted my family and me prevented me from stopping to consider. I also conveyed my want for us to take her out of our lives, to stop any more damage, and made it plain that I could not tolerate any more of her poisonous behavior. Chad paid close attention. His face mirrored my own suffering and annoyance. He agreed with me and noted Elizabeth's behavior was absolutely wrong. After our honeymoon, he told me he intended to see his parents to let them know about our choice. Chad made it plain that he was even ready to rise up and cut his father off should he object to the decision to keep Elizabeth out of our life. To be honest, it's somewhat relieving that my husband is not as insane as his mother is. I last modified it 2 weeks ago. I want to thank everyone for always checking on me. Regarding the revision, Chad's parents responded as challengingly as we had expected when he confronted them about his choice at last. Particularly upset, his mother begged him to change his mind and tried to make him feel bad about shutting her out of our life. She also implied that Chad and she could keep a connection without my being there, suggesting he didn't have to be a coward and could just follow his wife's desires. Firm in his choice, Chad turned away their appeals or threats, knowing that we had to give our own mental health and well-being top priority. Even if it meant cutting ties with his mother, he made it abundantly plain to her that our partnership always comes first. She left to contemplate the news. Elizabeth has been unrelenting in trying to get in touch since then. She has inundated me with voicemails and messages, and with time, their tone has become increasingly hostile. I first thought of blocking her everywhere, but a friend advised me to log all of her messages. In this sense, should the matter get more severe, I would have a recorded record of her actions, which may be helpful in seeking a restraining order should her voicemails call for it. Elizabeth has threatened me countless times in her voicemails. She has said she intends to ruin my life and even expressed her wish I never have children. The threats have been really scary and disturbing. Clearly, her bitterness and resentment were not quite gone. Of course, Chad wasn't home. Elizabeth dropped by our house unannounced today, and I'm surprised by how some of y'all guessed. Alone, I started to get nervous when I heard the strong pounding on the door. The door camera showed Elizabeth standing outside. Seems upset and disturbed? I simply lacked the emotional stamina to deal with her right now, and had no intention of bringing her in, as it would cause another heated encounter. Through the Ring doorbell, I told her Chad wasn't at home and she wasn't welcome to come in. She got much angrier hearing my voice. She started yelling at me, labeling me a homewrecker, and charging me with purposefully keeping her child far from her. I said nothing since I wanted not to escalate. She then began calling nasty names and even threatened to strangle me should she ever find me outside. Her threats rocked me, and I understood then enough was enough. I had to act to shield myself. Should she fail to leave, I asked her to be aware that I will phone the police. This just appeared to intensify her wrath in a frenzy. Elizabeth dropped her backpack and started violently kicking the door. I was actually terrified given her weight and her behavior. Her physical aggressiveness made me worry about my own safety. Understanding the gravity of the matter, I phoned the police right away. I told them about Elizabeth's threats and violent actions at my door, therefore outlining the circumstances. While awaiting the cops' arrival, I followed her every movement from the door camera. She looked like a crazed person trying to open our door. I also told my husband about the circumstances when phoning him. He guaranteed me he would leave his job right away and drive back to our house. Elizabeth showed no indication of cooling down when the police at last turned up. Her tantrums persisted, and she freely told me she wanted me dead even in front of the police. The cops had no choice except to arrest her right away with this degree of antagonism. Seeing her being hauled away was strange and terrifying. Elizabeth was under custody, and the police asked me for a statement. They promised to follow up on things and told me she would be staying in jail tonight. Knowing that, at least for now, I was secure, and the immediate threat was under control gave me some tiny solace from the residual anxiety and misery. Chad found me crying on the sofa when he got home. Seeking to calm me, he put a consoling hug around me. About his mother's actions, he obviously was as confused and disturbed as I was. We both came to see that this couldn't be just dismissed. Elizabeth's behavior crosses a line deserving of major repercussions. We have both decided that we must move forcefully to make sure this never happens to us once more. It is not an option to drop the lawsuit against her. Her aggressive actions and threats to my life should make her answerable, not only for our own peace of mind, but also to stop any similar events. Thus, we should seek legal action. 5 months separate have gone by since my last post. Much has changed since then. Elizabeth first was convicted of harassment and had to pay a hefty fine in addition to required community service. The court also granted a restraining order to guarantee she would never be able to get in touch with me or approach me ever once more. Chad's father has contacted me in the aftermath several times to apologize. He showed great regret for the course of events. Though his apologies did not undo the harm done, it was a first toward Elizabeth's behavior's seriousness being acknowledged and owning it. At first, when my father found out about the whole affair, he handled things himself, even with his own physical difficulties. Once Elizabeth was on bond, he personally visited her and her husband. He made it abundantly evident to them that although he was crippled, he would not hesitate to defend me and make sure Elizabeth met dire repercussions should she ever have attempted to attack me. Reminding them he had a gun, he would not hesitate to use it should she try to approach me once more. Elizabeth clearly must have been horrified and disturbed to see her dad so enraged. In order to make sure everyone realized the seriousness of Elizabeth's conduct, so she might not subsequently be able to control the narrative, I also decided to post something on Facebook addressing the matter more broadly. I added the camera footage of Elizabeth yelling at me and trying to kick our door down in it, therefore outlining the harassment. Exposing her risky behavior and making sure our family and friends understood the truth was my aim. Chad and I have decided to relocate to a new house, one whose location we will keep private save from a small number of close friends. This action hopefully will give us a fresh start. Elizabeth will likely do some major jail time should she try to break the restraining order or harass us once again. Our current priorities are creating a good future, and we are resolved not to let Elizabeth's actions shape our life anymore. Story 3. Still tormented me for dating her brother following his divorce, then sent me an apology bridesmaid invitation. She turned out to have been driven to rescue her dream wedding by her mother. Hello, everyone. I turned 26 years old. Kyle, 34, and I are expecting our first baby and soon will be married. After 7 months in a relationship, the baby surprised both of us. From the start of our relationship, Kyle's sister Bella, 36, has caused problems. His younger brother Victor, 27, introduced Kyle and me during Kyle's divorce proceedings. I had just broken off a long-term relationship, whereas he had been apart from his wife for more than a year. We began chatting and finally grew close enough to be friends. Neither of us right away sought a relationship. He had begun treating his depression, and I had lately changed my anxiety meds as well. 2 months later, he asked me to be his girlfriend, and months later, his divorce was finalized. I agreed. 1 month into our union. Since I knew his mother and brother previously, he set up a family dinner. I met Bella, who started bothering me in all conceivable manners. My accent, my clothes, my hair, trying to make me seem dumb in a passive-aggressive way. Kyle and his brother and mother defended me, but Bella felt insulted and departed early. Kyle and I have not kept in much touch with Bella after then. She still remains the control freak she is and best friend to Kyle's ex-wife. Thinks Kyle shouldn't have split from his ex. This seemed really strange to me. She said for months, I was Kyle's app and the cause of his divorce. She told everyone in our social circle, and finally it came to us. Ridiculous? Personal problems drove Kyle to break off his relationship. No infidelity existed. When he began the divorce process, we barely knew each other. I was still with my ex. Despite our denials, this rumor lingered for almost 4 months. She even told their extended relatives the story. It got to my grandparents first, then spread. The matter grew so convoluted that Kyle's mother, a woman of great renown, had to undo the lies her daughter had produced. We then planned to cut her off entirely, avoiding venues she would be visiting. Still, she kept lying about me, saying I cheated on my ex. He broke the advice I gave Kyle to totally cut off his ex. I wanted to be with Victor, so I never mentioned his relationship with his ex. My pal is his long-term girlfriend. Saying I'm only pursuing Kyle's family money, she brands me promiscuous. Our financial position is identical. Hence, the worst thing she said about me was that no man would abandon me even if my mother did. My mother suffers from borderline personality disease and schizophrenia. Once she quit receiving treatment, my father tried to dispose of me and divorced her. Yes, she did also desert me following that. I am expecting. We recently learned that I am not yet 12 weeks along. Still, Kyle told his brother and best buddy. His best friend told his wife, who then told Bella. Bella organizes events, and at the previous one she made sure her pals told Kyle. Before, Kyle didn't want children. Now, Bella and Kyle's ex are spreading ideas that I'm only a rebound and that my relationship with Kyle wouldn't endure. And Kyle will crawl back to her once his ex finds someone else. I now worry that this might be accurate as well. It is intolerable now. I feel tired. Kyle and I seldom spoke with his family, and still she doesn't stop. She wants Kyle to leave me and for me to vanish. All I truly want is for a healthy surroundings for my child to grow up in. I want no shattered house like the one I lived in, and this petty woman won't let me even attempt. I am not a home-destroying monster. I simply developed feelings for someone who loves me backward. How then do I handle this? What action ought I to do? I want not to start additional disturbance. I am not the kind she describes. I'm 26, female, engaged, and our relationship is really new. Still, we have a baby expected, 9 months. The pregnancy on the doctor's advice required me to change my meds. Hence, my insane SIL has been causing misery in my life. Everyone's calling me a rebound based on hearsay from my SIL, and I'm beginning to believe it. Though I have never been the other woman, I got involved after personally meeting my future husband during his divorce. Still, it feels like I destroyed his 12-year marriage, like some homewrecker who destroyed everything. In her field, his ex is among the best. She is attractive, sophisticated, and has everything sorted out. How am I supposed not to feel insecure? How I missed feeling insecure previously is unknown. He works for a living. He is in a financially steady state. He's got everything in order. I'm a mess. Though I want to be a pediatrician, right now I'm pregnant and unsure how to pursue it. Should I drop out of medical school? I'm not sure. Gathered. I would never wed me, let alone start a family. Why would someone want a child with me? BPD and schizophrenia run in my mother. She almost executed me at 4. She fled then and never spoke to me once more. What if I prove to be just like her? Every day of PPD, I am terrified of not being able to love my baby, not be able to look after him. Afraid? I might try to hurt him. I occasionally consider it would be better if I handed my baby to my fiancé, and possibly he might raise him with his ex. I could vanish as my mother did, and they would be the ideal family. I then despise myself for considering such. Still, I adore my fiancé. I adore my infant. I detest myself as I cannot tell my fiancé this. I fear rebounding once more. And I am at last understanding that I am a rebound and he no longer wants me. Not me, nor the infant. Worse still, he will take my baby and return to his ex. Before, I did not feel like this. Though I have always felt nervous, never this uneasy. Nothing is happening to me. Any information regarding the reason her fiancé filed for divorce? It's really complex since it mostly relates to the mental state of my fiancé. He said he married her since it was the proper thing to do, not driven by love for her. They had known each other always and finally got married really young. He struggled with depression and believed that lack of feeling was simply a normal aspect of it. Therefore, it took him a long time to come to see this. He realized during his treatment that he was merely following the rules to satisfy his dad and that he loved his ex. He had a somewhat violent connection with his father. He felt it fair for his ex as well as for him to seek a divorce. Looking back on her relationship with her fiancé, we have been formally dating for 8 months and a year overall. When we first moved in together, we discussed marriage, but it was only a plan for a year from then. After learning of the pregnancy while undergoing tests, he suggested, as it fit our plans, but the pregnancy just wasn't. Although he spent 12 years married, I believe he was with his ex for around 16 years. I put this up a while ago, and it let me reevaluate some prior events. I now need direction on my present circumstances. I treat myself terribly in relationships. She hates that I'm wrecking her friend's life and is great friends with my fiancé. Not once did my fiancé flirt or cheat while he was with his ex. I eventually had to call a lawyer to get her to stop verbally attacking and harassing me. She was quiet for some time following the cease and desist letter. She gave me a box last weekend containing food, beverages, some makeup, and invitations to be one of her bridesmaids. Requesting that I take this honor as an atonement for what she had done, she penned a lengthy letter. The issue is that I'm truly thinking of at least coexisting without unnecessary arguments. I invited my fiancé on Saturday night and stated I was considering it, and it resulted in a major fight. My fiancé truly doesn't want to see her ever again and harbors a great resentment against her sister. Though it entails making some sacrifices, I want our baby to grow up in a large, content family. He claimed he was not invited to be a groomsman and believes SIL used this as justification to call me a shrew. As I expect the best of everybody, Kyle finally said he's bored with my naivete as it always ends up hurting us. Not knowing what to do, I visited my stepmom following the altercation. Sunday night, I returned home following advice from my dad and stepmother. I tried to ignore it and carry on, but just the fact that she sensed something set my fiancé and me into a major battle. I wish to settle this in the finest manner available. Starting my second trimester, everything seems harder and more draining. Both Kyle and I have been fatigued lately. My pregnancy hasn't been the easiest. We are working extra and juggling marriage's pressures as well as children. The fact that we wish to do things differently does not help me to avoid conflicts between us. Though my SIL is here, I truly want to make a place where my baby can at least visit their grandparents calmly. My fiancé is willing to cut off his mother if needed. How, therefore, should I approach this? Edit. Some here have been calling me poisonous and claiming my fiancé should leave me. Though I know I screwed up, I love him with all my heart. As soon as he gets home, I'm going to apologize. We have never argued like this before. Hence, I never realized I had done something so horrible. I never meant to treat him poorly or put anyone else above him. Since I never had a normal family, and I felt I destroyed what he had with his family by being with him, I just thought I could make things work. I apologize to everyone that finds me repulsive. If he wants to split, I'll go without grumbling. Thinking I wounded someone I love, I get a heaviness in my chest and stomach sickness. Further information. More information on the Coop family. I've been acquainted with his younger brother and his girlfriend for a long time. Hence, we always eat dinner with them. His mother declines to join, of course. My SEL never shows up as she is not invited. She came to see me once to check on the infant and me. Still, he sounds depressed when he talks about it, as they had this custom for years. He never claimed I was the trouble, but when I arrived, things seemed different. It wouldn't be this way either, like if it were any other woman with him. Elemental assistance, you really ought not to take. If you reach the level where this person received a cease and desist issued, you should continue to be no contact. People like this most definitely do not change. This is quite definitely a trap, and to fall for that would be a great stupidity. Edit. People have to realize that requesting OP to be her bridesmaid broke a cease and desist order. Give up urging her to answer. She should not answer at all. Keep French. You have to let your fantasies of a large, contented family fade. You should respect your husband's choices and go by his lead with his sister. Pursuing a relationship with her will cause issues between you and your spouse. She cannot be relied upon and is poisonous. Proceed forward. Zombie, healthy. 2616. Sometimes family is the one who is always at our side instead of those related by blood, Lupe says after reading others' responses. Reading the comments let me see how naive I have been about everything. In a sense, my apology was everything I needed. It was what I hoped would help me to be accepted into the family and bring about harmony. I never wanted to treat my fiancé disrespectfully or violate his family values. He misses family get-togethers on weekends with his mother, brother, sister, and in-laws, and I feel like I have wrecked everything and simply wanted to right things. I simply want a nice pregnancy experience and love him so much. Sure, I feel nervous. Had to change my meds for the pregnancy, and that plus hormones makes everything strange. To see whether anything can be done, I'm going to discuss the apologetic letter with my fiancé and most likely my lawyer. I want no more dealing with harassment. Since a lot of nasty things were spoken and I needed some alone time, I visited my parents' house, and he did likewise. Hey, everyone! Fantastic announcement. I will be a mother to a boy child. My fiancé likes Gustav. I favor the names Lestat and Beau. I have to admit, I am very enjoying to admire too. I want to thank you all and clear some points. I appreciate your guidance. While some of it hurt when I first posted it, all of it was beneficial in some sort. First of all, I am not a spoiled and immature young woman imposing my will on my fiancé. I felt I had to deal with his sister since she has always had issues with me, not with him. She is his sister. Hence, like you all stated, they have to live with it or not. Indeed, I had years of therapy and am a really nervous person. Abuse from my mother tormented me. Growing up, my only family consisted of my dad. Someone trustworthy saved me when my dad at last made his way back to his hometown, and we might have a family outside of the two of us. Although I have been working on this for a long time, many would not know how much lately's decisions in pregnancy have changed depending on this. I feel as though I am the one lacking the deserved affection and family, and I can't stop thinking about it as my son will go through something similar. But as many of you pointed out, my family is now my husband, my baby, and me, along with my dad, stepmom, grandparents, little brother Bill, Victor, and pals at hand. Thus, the actual item I posted that night is I discussed this with my hubby. Late after a shift, he returned home and then went out drinking with Victor. I said I was sorry for interfering in his connection with his sister, for assuming I understood her better than he did, and for starting pointless strife. I also said I was sorry for elevating his emotions over the fantasy of a large, content family. His response startled me as he sobbed and generally seems to be rather stoic. He stated it wasn't true at all and apologized for declaring he was bored of me. But it's difficult to witness the person you love most in a situation whereby their suffering results from pleasing someone quite selfish. We said apologies and carried on talking late into the evening. Many of you advised he should leave me, so I inquired whether he needed a break from me. He stated it never entered his mind, which was a great relief. I had already started to picture packing to visit my folks' place. We agreed to gently turn down the invitation, but my fiancé took a day off to sort out matters with his family. I missed it as I'm still in the early stages of pregnancy with 5 to 6 months to go and find it too taxing. What next came of the family conversation? The one behind the invitation was my mill. She advised my fiancé that SIL should pay for the wedding and that she wouldn't show if the entire family wasn't present. SIL could fund the wedding herself, but because it would be somewhat costly, having their mother absent would be detrimental to her savings. SIL is a VP for her parents' firm. Hence, many large contracts will be at the wedding. She has to keep appearances in line. SIL thus thought of inviting me as a bridesmaid and wrote a sincere note to help me to relax. Yes, her maid of honor would be my fiancé's ex. The ex didn't want to see my fiancé with me, so he wasn't asked to be a groomsman. He would have been asked to visit often. Mill will so attend the wedding even though she is not now paying for it. Victor's fiancé and I will not be attending the wedding. Sil was going to honor me at her wedding, so I wrecked her dream wedding. And now I'm getting messages from unidentified numbers calling me petty. Funny, since the 36-year-old woman fighting with me wanted my fiancé to wed her best friend. She is unable to move past a divorce. Not even hers is what I mean. She will luck her fiancé well. She would never directly attack her brother because of their mother, I believe. She therefore hurts me to get to him. Other things have come up, and we will try to distance ourselves more from her, especially considering the baby en route. Bill claimed she had a mental breakdown upon learning we were expecting a baby. He said SIL seems to be jealous of us getting pregnant so soon into our relationship. She has fertility problems. Given she is the eldest, she dreamed of presenting the family with the first grandchild. Who would have thought a surprise baby could cause such a disturbance? I appreciate everyone's listening and sharing of personal experience. See you right? No baby named Lestat. You will succeed. I advised Kyle on renouncing the name in a note. Right now, he is the happiest man alive. The next narrative is, girlfriend calls my female friend a pick-me girl and issues an ultimatum based on her dislike of her. Since my friend is accompanying me, either she is moving out or skipping the group trip. I am 20:06 a.m. Regarding a situation with my girlfriend, I really need an outside view. 26F. First of all, my girlfriend and I have been dating for 3 years of dating. Things in our relationship have been generally good throughout. We have had our problems, and our schedules somewhat clash, but we make it work. Right now, we have a major conflict. Good friend, 28F of mine. For clarity, let me call this friend Violet to set some background. Violet and I belong to a tiny friend group. The group consists of 2 more persons. About 2 years ago, we met during a movie festival. We were all now lined up to go into the theater. The line was long, and we all kind of naturally started a conversation and hit it off. We stayed in touch later on. Since most of the group members live far away, we cannot spend too much time together in person. Still, we have weekly group gaming sessions and anime movie watching lawn and daily conversations. Violet is the closest person living near me, pretty much in the next town over, so we see each other personally the most outside of the group's virtual meetings. She turned me down every time I tried, including her, but she doesn't want anything to do with it, mostly because she doesn't particularly care for our interests. I did invite my girlfriend to each virtual and in-person meetup. Stuff like anime, manga, or gaming is childish to her. The movies we watch are mostly older-era films and films that were restored, but she's not into those either. This disconnect between us was an issue before I even made this group of friends. It's not like she'll engage in these things to spend time together like I grew up on game nights. I'm not even talking about video games necessarily. I'm talking board games, card games, etc., but she doesn't care for that. She either shuts it down and goes off to do her own thing, or if she does actually watch something with me or play a game, then she makes it known that it's a chore for her, and she belittles whatever it is increasingly throughout. She calls it joking, but it feels more like belittling. It gets to a point where I don't even enjoy whatever we're watching or playing. I'm not particularly a huge fan of reality TV, but I still watch with her and try to genuinely engage because for me, it's not about the show so much as it's about spending some quality time together. So my friendship with the group has been a nice change of pace and has brought some balance, but it's become an ongoing issue in my relationship. Recently, the group has been putting together a trip to this upcoming anime con. The event lasts for a weekend, so the plan was to stay together at an Airbnb and split the cost. My girlfriend is outright against the trip because of Violet. She doesn't like my friendship with her and doesn't really seem to like Violet at all. She has a general annoyance whenever Violet's involved and gets upset whenever I talk or hang out with her. We could be having a disagreement about something entirely unrelated, and somehow it'll circle around to Violet. She also calls Violet a picnic girl. When the trip was first being put together, I invited my girlfriend. She had no interest in coming and later expressed an issue with me going. She doesn't like that I'd be staying in the same house as Violet during the trip. I offered a compromise of me just booking a hotel and meeting up with everyone, but that wasn't an acceptable option for her either. Nothing I propose is she's willing to hear me out on. It's all on deaf ears because she knows Violet's going. The trip has become a major point of contention between us. She now says that it's proof that I have feelings for Violet, because I keep defending her during arguments and because I won't let the trip go. I haven't let the trip go because I would really like to attend the con, and it's rare that everyone in the group schedules link up like this. My girlfriend views it as me taking a getaway with Violet. She's firm on her position on the trip and has given me an ultimatum. She said I could do whatever I wanted, but know that if I went on the trip, then I'd be choosing Violet over her and that she'd act accordingly. I honestly don't know what to do anymore. I'm not saying her feelings are invalid. Her feelings are her feelings. But I feel that she's being unreasonable and that her insecurity about my friendship with Violet is baseless. I feel pulled in two different directions, and now this ultimatum. All I do is compromise in our relationship, and it just feels one-sided. I don't understand why this one thing would be a deal breaker. How do I go about addressing this with her now? Revised November 11th, 2024. I, 20:06 a.m., wanted to give an explanation on the situation with my girlfriend, 26th, and her ultimatum. First off, thank you to everyone who commented and reached out. I really appreciated the feedback. It gave me a lot to consider. I didn't get a chance to reply to comments, so I'll address those questions in this post as well. A lot of people asked how my GF and I even got together. We knew of each other back in high school, but we didn't move in the same circles. We actually ended up going to the same college and bumped into each other at a party. So I think that's where our initial connection began. We were in this big college pond, and having a familiar face from back home made adjusting easier. We didn't start dating until later, though. Things felt more like a mutual respect back then. It was after we got together that it was almost like this overnight. Complete intolerance. I was also asked why she considered my friend Violet, 20, aita picnic girl. I honestly don't know the definition as I know it. It doesn't fit Violet, IMO. When I ask my GF, she only says that a woman knows another woman. She won't elaborate. She never pinpoints specifics. My GF was known to have a bit of a mean girl side back in high school. TBH, we discussed this before we started dating, and she seemed to work through that in college. But now it feels like that side very much shows whenever it comes to my interests or with anything involving Violet. In regard to the ultimatum, I went back and forth on what I should do and what I wanted for myself individually and for my relationship. I decided to still go on the group trip. I do believe compromise is part of a relationship, but this ultimatum isn't that. It's an attempt to bully